Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder we have another Q&A from the developers, or an answers from the developers like they call it. It's nice to see that we have another one. Normally we get one just before and after a major update, and normally it doesn't have a lot to do with the major update, but it's always nice to see what they're thinking. Sometimes you actually get definitive answers. Not a lot of the time though. Anyway, this one is done by the producer Vyacheslav Bulanikov, and if you don't know who that is BVVD. He's probably the second most, or maybe the third now, the third guy that we see the most in the War Thunder team. You have Kirill and you have Anton, the two brothers, and then you have Vyacheslav, I think it is. I apologize if I've got it wrong. But anyway, there's an Air Forces section, a Ground Forces section, and then a different section, so let's get into it. The French also famously completed and operated the HE-177A-3 under the SNCASE company. Will we see these variants as a French premium or event machine? Perhaps the HE-274 that was also completed by France as a premium. The HE-274 was not used as a bomber, so the chance is slim. Giving the HE-177 to France will mean we should give it to the US and the UK as well, as they were operated and tested by those countries too. Right now we do not have such plans. Let Germany alone have their long-awaited 177 bomber fun for now. So with this said, we have two interesting ideas, because the same logic could apply to a lot of things. Why do we have the Japanese B-17? Because since we've given Japan a B-17, shouldn't the British have one, and shouldn't the Germans have one? I'm sure at some point the Germans were able to capture a B-17, or they were able to put fragments of a B-17 together, which is basically what the Japanese did, and I'm definitely sure that the British used one. So, with that said, that is the argument for something like a HE-177 being used for France, Britain, and also America. So we have two sides of the coin here, and I think it just kind of comes down to, is it needed or not? And I don't think it is. For me personally, I'd rather certain bombers just get the same spawn as the 177. One of the things that makes the 177 so good is the fact that it gets the long-range altitude spawn. So it gets a really high spawn. None of the British bombers get this spawn. I have no idea why, but for some reason the BV-238 and the HE-177 get it. That means that they can easily get to their respected bases and also be able to dive away at 600 kilometers an hour, so people can't even catch you while you go back to your airfield. It's one of the safest bombers to use. It is completely ridiculous, but it is how it is. The easiest way to fix the 177 is either drop its spawn down to everybody else's, the high altitude, the high bomber spawn, or just move every other bomber up to the long range altitude spawn, or get people to fly stuff like the Hornet. Because the Hornet gets an altitude spawn, it can climb up to the 177 and it can batter it if it feels like it. But the issue is, you don't get a lot of Hornets nowadays. It's the same thing with the Germans, right? If you want to deal with the American and British bomber problem, if you see a lot of them in the day, you fly the Do 335. Same with the British against the Germans, you fly the Hornets. But yeah, well, it's all about a matchup thing when it comes to that. The HE-274 was not used as a bomber. It was used as a test bed. If you want to know what the 274 is, it's this thing. The 274 was a very, very large, high-altitude, heavy bomber. Or at least that's what it was supposed to be. There was two prototypes which were being designed and produced in France by Heinkel. And the idea of it is that it would be used in a long-range, heavy bombing, situation. They didn't finish the prototypes by the time the Allies actually assaulted the area, and because of that, when the Germans were driven out, they obviously didn't finish them. They were finished by the French with help from the US and the UK lads. So with that said, this is a bomber which is technically designed by the Germans, built mainly by the French, US and the UK. But when it was built, all the French used it for was testing. They didn't use it in any bombing capacities. They didn't even test it in a bombing capacity. They just tested how it would fly and would it be feasible. So that is why they say the HE-274 was never used in a bomber situation, because it wasn't. It wasn't used in that way. So with that said, if you actually wanted to add it to the game, what you would get is just a massive bomber with no bombs. The statistics on it are a few 15mm as defense, and also a 4,000 kilo bomb load. So a decent bomb load, but not a lot of defenses. Overall, if we gave a vehicle like this to France, then we open the door to a hell of a massive can of worms. I'm not sure that is something that's required. We already have opened that door, but we'll be slowly creaking it even more. Rank 6 has led to lots more modern vehicles, but the game is still missing many important World War II machines such as the B-26 Marauder, P-51BC variants, Avro Manchester, Ferry Battle Western Lysander, Bolton Pole Defiant and other variants such as the Mosquito Bomber variants and early Blenheim Fighter variants. Are there still plans for such machines? A. The list of machines are possible, nothing is off the table. Pointless answer, but at least, they're still on the table. The B-26 Marauder is one that comes up every time because it was mass-produced. It's a bomber, I think is the best way of putting it. This is the RAF's version. Overall, it should be in the game. I don't know why it isn't in the game. The only thing I can think of, the reason why it isn't in the game, is because there was 2 B-26s, and we already have one of them in the game, but it was renamed to a B-26. I don't know why the Americans did that, but yeah, it's a little bit confusing. But it would be nice to see the B-26 at some point. Then we have the Avro Manchester. So the Avro Manchester, the best way to describe it is it's a Lancaster with 2 engines. It's a twin-engine Lancaster instead of a 4-engine Lancaster. It came before it, and you could definitely say it was a test bed for the Lancaster. Very interesting plane, and if we don't get this soon, I hope we get the Whitworth Whitley. I really like the Whitley, just because of the silly stories that it had behind it and how useless it was. So the Manchester was a little bit more useful, but obviously they needed a bit more oomph, so they went with the Lancaster. Then you have the Ferry Battle, this weird-looking thing. As you can see, very large area for the cockpit, so it would be kind of annoying to try and model that. And the Ferry Battle overall was not the best machine, but it was produced in quite large numbers. Then we have the Lysander, as you can see, a high-winged monoplane, very similar to the French high-wing monoplanes. I believe, no, it's not the D520s, but you know which ones I mean, the rank 1 ones. And then you have the Bolton Pole Defiant, of course, basically the one which looks like a Hurricane, but has the 477s on the back, used primarily first as kind of a fighter, where they would wait for somebody to get on them and then open fire with the 77s. And then once the Germans figured it out, it was used as a bomber hunter at night. But then it was found that the engine was not exactly powerful enough, and also the way to be able to attack the bombers wasn't the best. But overall, it had a lot of success because, well, the Germans didn't know what it was, but once they figured out what it was, bad times. This would be a good gift premium. Then we have the Mosquito. So in the Q&A question, they talk about the bomber variants of the Mosquito. Right now in game, we have a fighter bomber variant, and then we have a anti-shipping / anti-submarine variant. What I would like, as they've said, is a dedicated bomber Mosquito, but also a dedicated fighter one. One of the nice things about the Mosquito, like this, is the F Mark II. It was... Let's just get rid of some of these. This is the F Mark II, and the F Mark II was the first fighter version of the Mosquito. Very streamlined, designed to annihilate anything in front of it. 477s, 420s, same as what we have in the tree already. but it was designed for maneuverability and speed. It wasn't designed to carry a bomb load. It wasn't designed anything like that. It was designed to annihilate anything in front of it. So it would be nice to get something like that, very much similar to how we have the Hornet in game, because the two versions of the Mosquito we have don't really do the Mosquito justice. We don't have a bomber version. We don't have a fighter version. We have an in-betweener, and then we have one which is designed to kill ships or submarines. Very odd. With its 57mm. P-51 B and C the same. All of these vehicles, for me, should be added to the game, and I'm sure they will over time. The issue is, as the question, lays out, if you look at the most recent updates the last year or so, everything has been rank 5 and rank 6, with a few additions which aren't. So an updated Spitfire model here and there, with some, Spitfires added to the game, but the majority of stuff has been rank 6. And, you understand why. They're trying to build up rank 6. I think at this point, it is built up, and now they're running into the matchmaking problems, which rank 5 ran into, and they're never going to fix them, because it's the human element, so they'll keep trying to throw in 9.0s, but people will still get up to 10.0s. Is the Fiat G59 possible for Italy? It had cannon armament, and a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, perhaps a nice premium. According to our research, only a mock-up cannon version was built for Syria. We do not have definitive or definite proof that the cannon version existed. Some Syrian photos show machine guns. So the aircraft was mostly used as a trainer and armed with 2 Breda machine guns, weak for the rank. Other interesting premiums are planned for this rank. Why does it have to be a premium? Anyway, this is the Fiat G59. If you don't know what a Fiat G59 is, it's a G55 with a big-ass Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in it. And I do have a cheat sheet here. So yeah, Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, early 1948. So this is a post-war aircraft, a lot of power behind it. The issue with this aircraft, though, is there wasn't a lot of them which were converted, because since it's using the G55 testbed, I think about 30 of them were converted. And once again, I can't find anything on whether this thing was even armed. So if it was armed with 2 12-7s, which, in the picture we can definitely see some kind of gun right here, then it's not going to be very useful. Then again, this one doesn't have a gun, so, go figure. But, this would be a machine which has the performance of a rank 4 aircraft with the armament of a rank 1/2 one. So you'd either have to go alternate history and try and throw in some actual guns on the machine, and they've definitely done that in the past, but I would personally like it if we were given vehicles which actually existed in their current form in game. So the G59 is an interesting one. I don't like the fact that it would be a premium. The way that the Italy tree is, we don't need any premiums in it. There are enough premiums in it to be able to satisfy, what you need. It's not that large of a tree. I think it's about 30 vehicles, maybe even less. And with that said, it's not hard to grind through. If you want any tips, just turn your brain off and play the bombers, and you'll be able to get through all of the tree within 2 to 3 days. That's all I did. I just fully spaded all the bombers. Once I did that, I just went to vehicles I knew I'd like, such as the 202, 205, and the G55, and just played them. And I was done with the tree within 3 days. So when we talk about premiums, I suppose, yes, if you want to grind out the jets, you're interested in the jets, then you could grind out them with a premium. But I'd prefer we beef up the tree a little bit instead of looking at more premiums. I think the G59 could fit in the game, but you need to find definitive proof about it actually having guns. The German P-47 model does not seem to be correct. The P-47s captured by Germany were of the Razorback kind, not the bubble canopy. Do you plan to fix this model? The model will be updated with P-47 overhaul, which will come eventually. Players and developers alike want the iconic Razorback version in-game. Something I didn't mention about the Mosquito is I'm sure the Mosquito as well will get a overhaul. Like, it'll get an updated model and then we'll get a bunch new variants. So I'm looking forward to that. Here we have the P-47 being, it's going to get a Razorback version. it's going to get an updated model, and that's what we like. That's what we love. So in game right now, we have the P-47Ds, we have the N, we have the M, and then we have the two D variants, the Soviet one and also the German one. So with that said, if they add in the Razorback version, I'm guessing it would just be an updated model. If you want to know what the Razorback version of the P-47 is, it's this. As you can see, the cockpit is slightly different. There's no bubble here. It's just straight across, and that is the main difference between it. So it's definitely a model difference, but it's nothing major. I would personally like to see an overhaul of specific vehicles such as the P-51s. And we have a decent amount of P-51s actually in the game now. We have the British one, we have all the American ones. I would just personally hope, once they update the P-47s, that maybe we get one for Britain. If we're going to decide that every nation should get a P-47, with an updated model, sure, let's just go for it. Let's go knackers. Let's go a bit crazy. Now, on to ground forces. Will we see more mid-rank SPA AGs like the AMX-13 DCA, Twin 30s, and Type 61 SPAAG? Japan and France could definitely do with more SPAAG love. Unfortunately, there were some difficulties with the research for information about the SPAAGs, but we do not rule out their appearance in the game. A Japanese prototype with a 76mm universal cannon can be interesting. Right, so, if you want to know what the Type 61 SPAAG is, it's this little thing here. It looks like a small Gepard, right? Well, that's kind of because that's exactly what it is. This is a machine which has two 35mm on it, and based on the Type 61 chassis. So yeah, it's just a small Type 87 or a small Gepard. It's the best way of putting it. So if they wanted to add that in, I mean, they could. It was built. Same with the AMX-13 DCA. One of the issues I personally have when I look at the French needing love and the Japanese needing love, there are two nations which you could class as major nations. At least one of them is definitely a major nation in the eyes of Gaijin, which have even larger problems than these two. So, one of the nations is the Soviets. You look at 4.7 to 7.7, you have a gap of 3 OBR where there ain't an AA. The only one that is available is the Type 65, and that's a gift vehicle. So if we take that out of the picture, because the majority of the playbase won't have it, you don't have a single AA, and the one that you have at 4.7, the ZSU-37, ain't exactly great. So what you're left with is a massive gap. The British are exactly the same. You go from the Crusader AA Mark I with its 140mm Bofors all the way up to 7.7 with the Falcon. So once again, you have this gap of 3. Now for the British, it's a little bit harder to fix, but for the Soviets, there are a bunch of designs that you could easily throw in there if they wanted to. And one of them is this. This is the ZS-37-2 Yensei, I think is the way it is. It's just basically a ZSU-37 with 2 37s instead of 1. Why isn't something like this? This is a prototype, it was built, I can find at least 2 pictures of it. It can't be exactly hard to model in the game. You already have the chassis done, you already have the guns done, all you have to do is produce a little turret. So with that said, why isn't this being under consideration for the Soviets? Or why do we never hear about the gap? Because the gap for the British and the Soviets is ridiculous. You know what the French have? They have a pretty good 4.7 AA. And yes, the gap is huge to the AMX-30 DCA, but at least that 4.7 one is good. The Japanese, you have the M42. You have something. The British and the Soviets, from 4.7 to 7.7, have nothing, and their 4.7s are awful. So it would be nice if, we get a little bit of love for the British and the Soviets in that regard. Are there any more planned US heavy tanks, perhaps premiums? There is still the T-26E5 and the 155mm T-30 to be explored as well as others. Yes, there are plans for American heavy tanks, at least 2, which 2 we do not want to say yet. So more American heavies, the big boys. Now let's have a look at some pictures, not these two. This is the T-26E5. The best way of describing it is that it's an up-armored M26, so it's an up-armored Pershing, and that's about it. That's really the only difference. You know how the Pershing had weight issues during transport? Well, let's add more weight to it. Then you have the T-30. Unfortunately, the picture is kind of small. The T-30 is a tank which looks very similar to the T-29 and the T-34, and it has a 155mm donk gun on it. It is designed to end your day, and that's exactly what it did. Once again, way too heavy, way too impractical, but still pretty cool, and would be fun to get into game. Also, the slope on the front is interesting, but yeah, as I said, very similar to the T-29, T-34. Hopefully we get this. Hopefully we do. I'm sure we will at some point. They did talk about the T-30 in the past, in some other Q&As and how they were developing it, so I'm sure we'll get it at some point. With the addition of the T-34 and the T-29, this is the next logical step. If we look at recent additions, though, a premium that they just added, the T-54E1 with the oscillating turret autoloader, 5-second, is classed as a medium tank for them, even though it's on a heavy tank chassis and it's 55 ton. So, if I was a betting man, I would say what they're working on is the T-54 and the T-54E2. Now, the T-54 is a standard turret version of the T-54E1 with an autoloader, and the T-54E2 is a standard turret edition with a standard loader. So, if they're working on anything, my guess is they're working on that, because they already have the base for everything, so why not just add in those two? It can't be that hard to do. Now, what will be interesting is if they label them as heavies or not, because the T-54E1 right now is not labeled as a heavy. The Japanese ground forces on rank 5 and 6 lack a lot of options that could be implemented due to historical reasons, but there are still many variants of the STB 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 prototypes, as well as the Type 74B to F models and Type 74G/Chi variant that could be split from the current STB-1 and Type 74 tanks in-game. Do you have plans to introduce more variants of these machines, perhaps an STB variant as a Japanese Tier 5 premium? Unfortunately, there is simply too little information on these machines, including details on the specific model's appearance, while they are very similar in form and characteristics. So far, we have not considered adding more variants due to this reason. One of the things that you've got to constantly grapple with as I'm sure a game designer, but also as a fan of a game like War Thunder, is how different, where do you draw the line on how many vehicles you want added? So, we have 4 Mark V Spitfires in the game. 2 of them are very similar, and the other 2 are also very similar. We also have the Mark 1A, the Mark 2A, the Mark 2B, the Mark, as I said, all the Mark 5s, then you have the Griffin Spitfires, you have the F Mark 9, you have the Mark 16, you have a ton of different Spitfires, but where do you draw the line and say this is too many? Would it be if you got 3 Spitfires which were incredibly similar, and they didn't really have a difference, and you had to grind through all of them, and if you folded them, well then nobody's going to play them, so what's the point in adding them? Just like some of the machines that we've seen recently, like the XM803. So, with that all said, why do we need more of the same vehicles? I understand. A lot of people like the STB-1. I personally think it's the best 7.7 in the game. It's insane. It is easily... There's something weird about Japan, where Japan always gets the best vehicles at specific BRs, even though it doesn't really make a lot of sense. When the Type 74 was added, it was easily the best top-tier MBT. The STB-1 being at 7.7 is just a... it's just a stabilized Leopard 1, and the Leopard 1 is already really good at 7.7. Then you have the Type 90, which is the best, top-tier tank in the game. So, there's something weird going on with Japan, where they always get these amazing vehicles, and a lot of people talk about, well, we don't have the backup to them. Well, the majority of the time you don't need the backup. And second of all, you still have the best vehicle in the game, or at least you did. Now, with the STB 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, I've tried to find information on them. I found a lot of information which basically say that they're all very similar. Same with the Type 74s. The only things that were changed are either upgraded optics systems or slight tweaks to specific things. Kind of like when you look at the Challengers, the Mark 1 to the Mark 4, there's not really that much different to them apart from some internal components. Very much similar with the STB and the Type 74. The only one which seems to be slightly different is the Type 74 GK, but even with that, you have an issue with lack of information. There have always been two pictures bandied about the Type 74. One of them looks believable, one of them looks like a game. This one, to me, looks like a game. This looks like somebody's taken this Type 74 and tried to make it look realistic in a video game. But if it's real, it's real. You know, it's simple as that. It seems to have extra composite armor on the turret and extra armor overall. It's also angled weirdly to the front. And then you have this one. This is the Type 74 that actually looks real. It has composite armor, looks like spaced armor on the sides. It has, it looks like it has some upgraded optics on it. And this looks to me what a GK would look like. So extra composite armor on the turret, and that's really about it. Maybe an upgraded engine. Now, will this help you at top tier Japan? Not really. It would just mean that you have another machine that would be exactly the same as the machine you already have. And if you want that, go ahead. I don't really like playing very similar vehicles. The M1 and the M1 IP, for example, I'm not really looking to use the M1 IP, the XM803 to the MBT70. I'm not really looking forward to using the XM803, because I just already have used the other one. Maybe it's just an issue that I personally have, but as I've said before, I don't really like grinding through vehicles which are exactly the same as ones I've already used. It's not something that I personally am interested in at all. So yeah, hopefully one day Japan gets more medium tanks which will perform exactly the same as the medium tanks they already have. Like, why would you want that? Unless you want more in a lineup, but it's just still going to be incredibly boring to spade them. Anyway, so these are questions specifically from the Hungarian community, which is really interesting, actually. I wonder if we'll ever get one from the British community. I'm sure it'll just be, give me all the British bombers, give me all the British tanks, and I'd be fine with that. I'd love to see their answers. And I'm sure all of the answers will be, we have not ruled anything out. Maybe in the future. You know? Anyway, is there any chance that we'll see Hungarian vehicles in the game? If yes, which tech tree will they be part of? There is a chance, more likely as individual samples, perhaps as premiums in other nations. My guess is, if you want to make a bit of moolah when it comes to War Thunder, start making vehicles which are for minor nations. We've just seen the IAR 81C being added. We've also just seen a user model of a wonderful Dutch aircraft that I'll be covering either today or tomorrow. And the trend that I can see coming for mid-tier to lower-tier stuff is going to be minor nation premiums. Now, they've already said that Italy is going to be a bit of a dumping ground for minor nation premiums, and the reason for this is because they don't have a lot. When the IAR 81C came out, a lot of people complained, why isn't it in the German tree? And they basically said because Italy doesn't have enough premiums. So look towards the minor nations we have in game, and then you'll see those other minor nations vehicles. Now, whether you agree with that or not, I personally would rather see tech trees. You know, I'd personally rather see minor tech trees. I like the idea of, you know, if you get to, like, German rank 3, you unlock a Romanian tech tree, or if you get to British rank 3, you unlock a Commonwealth tech tree. I think that's a really cool idea, but it seems like they're more interested in just making them premiums, so, yeah, that's probably the only place you're going to see them. Do you plan to introduce ATGM deflection systems? There are some ideas being considered. Now, this got my noggin jogging, because it reminded me of two failed prototypes from the Russians. And we've just heard that the Armata is going to be downsized. A lot of people, for some reason, had this idea that it was going to be a replacement to the T-80 and the T-72s that are used in, frontline service for the Russians, even though they only ordered 200 of them by 2020. You would need to make a hell of a lot more than them to make the Armata a main battle tank. I think a lot of YouTube channels have shown that I think they've propagated this myth that the Armata is just this crazy machine, even though it really isn't. It's just one which, it has a crewless turret. Its armor on the turret is weak. It's going to be incredibly hard to repair. And even though they built it for crew survivability, it's going to have issues with surviving crew because of side shots, because of also the fact that you could just hit it from above. And also, how do you fix it mechanically? There's a lot of issues. Also, when it comes to crew survivability, there is only one way out of that thing, and it's up. So good luck trying to get out. Anyway, talking about ATM, I might do a separate video on that, because that really annoyed me when people were saying it was the best thing since sliced bread. Anyway, ATGM deflection systems. 2 prototypes came up. And also, this brings me to something else. A lot of people think that the Armata is the first of its kind. It's not. This is a T-95. It's a crewless... It's a vehicle made by the Russians, which has exactly the same idea as the Armata. It has a 3-man crew, all in the front of the hull, and nobody in the turret. This was the prototype to the Armata. It failed because it was too expensive, too impractical. Guess what the Armata is doing right now? Then you also have the T-12 Black Eagle. This thing. This is an upgraded T-80. Has some of the same ideas as the Armata. Not a lot of turret space, I think we'll say. Very low to the ground. And also some deflection systems. So, when we talk about ATGM deflection systems, the Russians seem to have it down. They have the Contact 5, which is designed to deal with heat and also APFSDS to a certain extent. And then they have these deflectors. And I don't know how else to describe it apart from this picture. You see how this is modeled here and here? They're basically at extreme angles, and the idea is to try and get this thing to ricochet off. So a lot of ATGMs, they'll hit this thing, and it won't be absorbed, but instead it will just ping off. And the only way you can do this is through reflectors or deflectors in very, very specific angles. And obviously it's a little bit of a chance game, but that is why they've designed these turrets like this, to be able to deflect these. If you look at a T-95 when it doesn't have the gun thing on and it actually has its armor, it has like pyramid armor like this all around the turret, and it's designed to deflect ATGMs. So maybe one day if we ever get to very modernized machines. Are there any technical difficulties that prevent the implementation of afterburners? As far as we are aware, no. Okay, simple. There's definitely some issues in the current version of the game with speed. Once you get above a certain speed, let's just say planes freak out. So yeah. Can we expect the rewind function in replays anytime soon? Soon, unlikely. This is something that they mentioned at the start of the year that they're working on, and it's near the end of the year. I'm guessing the priority of it is not very high, and I understand why. For the majority of the community don't use it, and, well, they don't need to, but for a person like me, it would be really nice if they added it, so that's the way I see it. Do you plan to introduce the so-called Rank Zero? That would consist of vehicles from World War I and all between the 2 world wars. There are no such plans for the moment. Even though I would like to see a Rank Zero, with World War I and interwar tanks, I understand why they don't do it. It's not a moneymaker. People would grind through it within a day, and if they dedicate a patch to it for every nation, adding a bunch of tanks, people are going to get very bored very quickly. And you would take all of this effort to be able to, make all of these vehicles, but you'd have to make them incredibly cheap. With that said, I think there's going to become a point where Gaijin is going to run out of vehicles. We're already seeing 1990s tanks in the form of the Time 90. We're seeing 2000s helicopters already in the form of the AH-1Z, is it the Viper, or whatever it's called, the AH-1Z, the American helicopter. We're going to eventually see modern tier tanks, planes, and helicopters And what I'm hoping is that one day, well, even the Warrior, right, the FV510, that is also a modern day, IFV. So with this all said, what I'm hoping is that we'll eventually run out of vehicles to add, so we'll finally go back in history. Now, this is a hope and a wish, because there are lots of vehicles out there. Talked about in this Q&A itself, there's a lot of World War II stuff that hasn't been added when it comes to ground and air. So if everything is added, eventually we'll get World War I interwar stuff. If there's nothing left, will we ever get to that point though? I highly doubt it. Is the ballistics of both aircraft and tank ammunition fully modelled? Sufficiently detailed for our purposes, taking into account the requirements for speed? In one battle there may be several thousand bullets and shells at a time that require some optimization. Yeah, that's true. If you've ever played a custom battle with a bunch of people just throwing shells around with unlimited reload, you know what it's like. It's a little bit hectic. Exactly how is battle activity calculated? That is a huge mystery amongst players. We use a rather complicated formula, but we can simplistically say that the activity in combat is directly proportional to the points earned in battle, and inversely proportional to the time of the whole battle. You know what would be really nice? Seeing the formula. You show us all the formulas for the battle rating stuff. Why do you have to hide it? But as a general rule, the best way to do it is make sure you have a ton of points and make sure that you survive a long time in battle. That'll give you good battle activity. The problem with this whole thing, though, is we need to see the equation. The only reason to not show the equation would be if they believe that showing the equation would mean that the general player is going to exploit the system, especially since a lot of the festive events and the summer events, there's always one battle activity thing in there, generally wins. So win 10 matches with battle activity 60-70%. Maybe they're worried about people exploiting the system, but I still think for transparency reasons, it would be nice to see the equation, just to see what it looks like and just to see how crazy it is. But that is the Q&A in general. There is not a lot of answers here, but the topics actually brought up by the community and answered are really interesting. And it is nice to see their ideas towards specific things. I personally would love to see more British vehicles. Right now, the last few patches, it's been a bit grim. We've had the Vickers Mark 6A. We've had the Chieftain Marksman, which, thank God we're on the same level playing field as every other nation now when it comes to top tier AA. And, well, that's good. We have been given the Warrior, which is, you've seen my videos. And then we've got another vehicle, the Avery. Worst rank 5 vehicle in the game. So or rank 5 premium, I should say. It would be nice to have some more British vehicles and some American ones. And I personally don't like captured premiums. I don't like the idea because I don't like fighting myself. I think that's it's not a good matchup. It's not fun. Even if one aircraft or vehicle is superior to another one, I would rather fight that matchup than one where I just fight myself. I find that incredibly boring. So hopefully we don't see that many of them in the future. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.